Small Changes by Digits 27, Chapter 17, Same Old Pranks. Naruto smiled as he ducked under the flaps of the Dangoya, giving a friendly wave over to the owner, who gave him a congeal smile back. The man had learned to be polite and friendly to the boyfriend of his best customer, as Zango tended to be a rather unpredictable kunoichi, and didn't take insults to her or the things she cared about very well. There was one time the man had spilled red bean paste over him, and Uncle had refused to go there for almost a month. Of course, that only meant that she had Naruto running over to the next town over every other day to pick some up, as the Dangoya was the only place in Konoha that made the stuff to her incredible high standards. He spotted Kurenai and Asuma and waved at them too, quickly walking in and sliding into the booth next to the Hokage's son. He missed the slight look of disappointment crossing Kurenai's face as he settled in. He didn't have to order, as he had been here enough times that they knew what he liked. He almost absently raised his hand as he saw Asuma light his fingers with a small fire jutsu, blowing out the tiny flame before he could bring it to the cigarette he was holding. "They don't allow smoking in here." After the older man had blinked away his surprise at the younger Jonin's reflexes, he grunted, pulling away the cigarette and grumbling under his breath in a gruff voice. "Then why'd I even bother coming?" Kurenai, already seeing the situation, deteriorated quickly, interjecting with a slightly forced smile. "We're here because I thought, as new Jonin Sensei, we should get to know one another, maybe coordinate a bit." She smiled brightly before realizing her gaze had lingered just a little too long on Naruto, quickly coughing into her hand and stammering out, "For the getting, of course." Asuma cocked an eyebrow before shrugging conjunctly, sinking back into the booth to get more comfortable. "Sure, I don't see why not. Might actually get my guys a bit motivated." He paused before snorting into his hand, a grin alight on his lips. As if, ignoring the small slight on the man's skin, considering Naruto didn't know them, the redhead just chuckled before remembering something. "Oh yeah, I told a friend they could come by. I hope that's okay." Kurenai and Asuma just shrugged, not really minding that much. It only meant a potential more ideas for how to handle their getting. "In fact, I think Uncle should be here any moment now." As Naruto looked behind him to see if his girlfriend had arrived, Kurenai and Asuma both looked down, racking their minds to try and think of where they had heard that name, before simultaneously looking at one another with wide eyes. "Oh, if it isn't Thorny and Smokestack!" An all too familiar voice cut in as Uncle hopped over the back of the booth with a plate in one hand and a stick of dango dangling from her mouth. Naruto looked back around with an amused grin, while Kurenai subtly shuffled a bit away from the boisterous woman. "You know them?" Both Kurenai and Asuma blinked in surprise. This was the person Naruto had invited. However, Uncle blissfully ignored their looks of incredulity, gulping down her snack before grinning and gesturing at the two with the now barren skewer. "Oh yeah, I've been on missions with them before, a while back I think. Thorny really comes in handy with those illusions of hers. Made my job so much easier." She snickered as she sucked up another dumpling before muttering, with her mouth half full so her words came out muffled and almost unintentional. "Only had to take my top off once." A light tick appeared over Naruto's brow before he forced it back down. He had accepted Uncle's specialty as an infiltration expert, and she wasn't going to let that old argument pop up again. "I think, anyway, I was pretty drunk." No matter how much she baited him, forcing a calm expression on his face so his girlfriend wouldn't have the satisfaction of getting a rise out of him, Naruto tried to divert the conversation. "And Asuma?" The two other Jonin sensei seemed a bit irked that Naruto was so casually accepting the irritating nicknames that they had apparently been saddled with. "Oh yeah, he's pretty good with those fire jutsu of his." A sly smirk appeared on the snake summoner's face as she let her elbow rest on the table. "When he isn't alerting squads of Kumo shinobi to our presence with those death sticks." Asuma's eyes twitched violently at that as he muttered under his breath, "That was one time." At that, Kurenai and Naruto couldn't help but chuckle, and with a start, all three, Jonin Sensei, had realized the ice was completely broken just with Uncle's presence. The woman could get a leaf nin and an Iwa shinobi to have dinner together if she really wanted. She had her own form of persuasion that was hard to say no to. Taking advantage of the sudden warm atmosphere, Naruto decided to take the initiative. So, Kurenai, you wanted to talk about the Genin teams? Ako's eyes lit up at that as she quickly swallowed the dumpling in her mouth in a way that wouldn't have won her any points for grace. Oh, the kiddies? You know, I've been wanting a team for a while now, but every time I ask, the Hokage tells me that it's not quite my time. She blew out air between her lips in mock frustration, whatever that means. The three sensei all just looked at her for a moment before turning to each other and continuing on as if she hadn't spoken. Yeah, I saw how effective that spar between our teams was. The slight cry of indignation between Anko at being ignored, ironically, when completely ignored, and I was hoping we could organize something a little more permanent. She chuckled good-naturedly. Shino's always been a hard worker, but I've never seen him train so hard as he did after being beaten by Sasuke. At that, Asuma let out a small whistle as he turned to Naruto. That's right, huh? You got the Uchiha kid, didn't you? Damn, getting the Rookie of the Year is pretty lucky. Naruto just nodded with a shrug. He didn't really like to think of his getting so cut and dry, and he saw potential in all of them. Seeing his mild discomfort, Kurenai quickly cut it. But you got this generation's Inoshika-Cho trio. That's nothing to scoff at. Their fathers were legendary after all, approaching the fame of the Sanin. At that, Asuma backed off Naruto, slumping back in his seat and rubbing a hand down his face. Yeah, they might have their father's potential, but all that means is right now I have a lazy genius who'd rather be looking at clouds than training. Some shy muscle who I can only motivate with food, and a bossy mind walker who knows just a little too much about human psychology than is healthy for a girl her age. Kurenai and Anko and Naruto had to laugh at that. Each had worked with at least one of the original Inoshika Cho, and the latest generation really sounded like their father's kids. Seeing them laugh, Asuma felt like a bit of retribution, slumping back up and pointedly lazing at the only female sensei. Well, you're one to talk about talent. Getting three major clan kids, two of which are hairs, is just cheating in my opinion. Kurenai blushed at that, having to admit that her team was rather weighted compared to most others. Plus, you got that Hyuga girl. I heard she would have been top Kunoichi if her grades had been more consistent and reflected her results towards the end. However, with that small declaration, any blush on Kurenai's cheeks vanished as she looked down at the cup she was holding, a frown creasing her brow. Feeling an awkward atmosphere descending over the table, Uncle quickly butted into the conversation. So what's it like having a gaining team? I bet it's pretty fun to be able to boss them around. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the purple-haired Kunoichi in bemusement. You've led missions as team captains before. Uncle just huffed playfully, dotting another piece of dango before waving the skewer about dramatically. Yeah, but that's with tuning. They're no fun because they do everything you say. She grinned sadistically, making Asuma feel just a little nervous. I bet the Guinean have a little fight left in them. At that, each of the sensei looked down at their drinks. Naruto thinking of Sasuke, Asuma thinking of Ino, Kurenai thinking of Kiba. Yeah, you could say that. All three looked up with slightly widened eyes as they realized that all said that at the same time before the table broke out in laughter again, causing a few of the other shops patrons to look over at them curiously. So anyway, Naruto tried to suppress the grin on his features and continued the conversation. You wanted to organize some team events like spars. Kurenai nodded, trying to get her breath back from the laughing fit. Asuma too was affected, wiping once at his eye and sighing contentedly at the shared moment between the three sensei. Sounds like fun to be honest. I can't motivate Shikamaru for anything, so maybe this'll help. I guess I'm free most Thursdays. We could do it then. He looked about the table to see Naruto and Kurenai looking through before nodding, agreeing with the suggestion. Well, great. Plus, it'll be good practice for when we enter them in the X. Suddenly, the young Sarutobi was caught off as Naruto's eyes widened, and he scrabbled over the table, literally clambering over Anko before he could hop over the back of the booth. Wait, Kakashi Taicho? The redhead looked ready to flash right out of the dango before realizing what he had done and turning back to the stupefied Jonin sheepishly. Ah, sorry. I've been looking for him for a few days now. Thursday's right. I'll see you guys there. Training ground 19. And with that, he just seemed to vanish in a blur of red, leaving two shocked sensei and a chuckling Anko. Yeah, he does that sometimes. Her words quickly broke the other two jonin out of their daze, eliciting Asuma to get up from the booth with a sigh. Well, this was fun and definitely a good time, but I think that's my cue to leave. He coughed through his hand nervously as he looked down at Kurenai. Unless, of course, you'd like to maybe go to dinner with me tonight, Kurenai? The woman in question blinked before realizing she had been asked the question. Her eyes were still fixed on where Naruto had disappeared to. Oh, no, sorry, I'm busy tonight. Asuma's posture slumped a little at that, but she shrugged it off so soon. It wasn't his first rejection after all. He ran a hand through his hair, nodding politely at the two women, and quickly walked out of the dango shack, grabbing a cigarette out of his pocket as soon as he crossed the threshold. Uncle turned to talk to Kurenai only to see the woman looking down at the table with a familiar expression. Uncle just couldn't help herself as a mischievous grin alighted on her lips. So that Naruto, one of a kind guy, huh? Kurenai nodded before she knew what she was doing, blushing almost immediately at her lapse. Uncle just chuckled, though pushing the other woman gently in the shoulder. Come on, we're both girls here. Kurenai sighed at that before a small smile approached her lips. It's just pretty rare to find such a young, powerful shinobi with such confidence. Uncle nodded, desperately trying to wipe the grin off her face by taking a sip of her sake. I went through my tuning years hearing about what he did in the Ambu, at least the declassified missions anyway. Plus, it feels like when I look in his eyes, he can just see right through me, almost like I'm staring into some kind of crystal, just reflecting everything right back at me in 1,000 different ways. At this, Uncle was practically stifling her snickers as Kurenai reached for her tea. Naruto said you were friends. How do you know each other anyway? Uncle's grin became solar as she waited just for the moment when Kurenai was sipping her tea. I'm his girlfriend. She couldn't help it as soon as Kurenai spat out her tea in a long, continuous spray right over the table and into the back of the person in the booth in front of them. Uncle's raucous laughter filled the dangoa. Ah, Kakashi Tachuo. Naruto skirted around a few people in the street before finally catching up to the man. Not that he had been walking at any real pace. In fact, he was going quite slowly so as to enjoy the little orange book he was reading. Oh, Naruto, how's my cute, not so little Kawhi today? Ignoring the veiled joke at him, always calling the man by his title despite them no longer working together. Naruto got right to the point. I was wondering if you would mind coming by a few of my training sessions and helping out one of my students. The man's one visible eye lit up in amusement as he carefully tucked the corner of his page and replaced his book in the pouch on his hip. That's right. You got yourself a little gaining squad. How's that going for you? Naruto smiled sheepishly as he ran his hand down the back of his hair, remembering his gaining ire over their last few D ranks. Pretty well. They seem to be coming along fine. A thoughtful look briefly passed over the redhead's face as he looked up at the taller Jonin. Now that I think about it, though, didn't you leave Ambu so that you could pick up a gaining squad? I've never seen you with one before. At that, it was Kakashi's turn to look a little bashful as his eye crinkled up with the trademark smile of his. Ah, well, none of the teams ever really met my expectations, and it just didn't feel right, you know? Naruto blinked before his face became deadpan. You were too lazy to take one on when you realized just how much work it would be, weren't you? It wasn't asked as a question, so Kakashi just chuckled and shrugged carelessly. Well, the Hokage told me that maybe this time I should step back and let some of the younger Jonin have a crack at it, if possible. Naruto's face became even more deadpan, his voice matching the expression. He got tired of you sending perfectly good Genin back to the academy, didn't he? All he got was a sheepish chuckle as the man's eye managed to wander everywhere but at Naruto's face. So, you said you had a Genin you need help with? Young Sasuke finally unlocked the Sharingan of his. Naruto quickly shook his head, internally sighing at his former captain's sheer laziness. No, this isn't about Sasuke, and when the time comes, I'll be able to train him perfectly well in the Sharingan. You forget who my teammates were and how much I trained with them. Kakashi shrugged non-comically. No, this is actually about Sakura. I was wondering if you could give her a grounding and genjutsu. You've picked up a little of everything in your time, and to be honest, aside from a few basic ones, I'm pretty terrible at it. At that, Kakashi could only raise an eyebrow, amusingly twinkling in his black orb again. Really? The teammate of two Uchiha is terrible at genjutsu? I would have thought you'd have picked up the basic through sheer proximity. Naruto shrugged lamely, remembering back to all those times Shisui and Itachi were trying to convince him of the value of the ninja art. He was a lot more interested in bringing his speed up back then. It's amazing what a young kid can tune out when they're really not interested. At that, Kakashi chuckled. He supposed he had been the same when he was a young Chunin, barely caring about anything other than learning how to be a shinobi that would pull him out of his father's shadow. In that respect, he supposed there were more similarities between him and Naruto than he would have first thought. So will you help me with her? Kakashi shifted his weight to his other foot as a speculative look appeared in his usual half-lidded eye. I don't know, my little Korahe. I'm an elite jonin of this village after all. My time is pretty valuable. He wriggled his lone eyebrow a few times for effect, making Naruto sigh and reach into one of his pouches. Fine. I was hoping you'd be a little more altruistic, but I should have known better. When his hand emerged and in rapid gleam overcame the older Jonin's face. This is, he didn't need to say any more, as Kakashi suddenly plucked the object right out of Naruto's hands, looking it over in wonder. A first edition copy of Each of Violence? An uncharacteristic girlish squeal emerged from somewhere in Kakashi's throat before he coughed into his palm, righting himself and trying to regain a modicum of his masculinity. I mean, this isn't supposed to be out until next month. Where did you get it? Naruto sighed, rubbing his cheek lightly in exasperation. It was supposed to be a gift for someone else. Jiraiya keeps sending me the damn things for some reason. For a moment, Kakashi looked genuinely hurt at his favorite book series being referred to in such a way. I suppose I can find a few things else, though. He didn't tell Kakashi that he had more than three identical copies of the same book sitting on his desk back home, partly so the man wouldn't realize how worthless it was to him, and partly out of shame for having them. However, now that Kakashi had managed to school himself, he began to look over the book with an obvious mock critical eye. Still, just one book of my service, I am. Naruto sighed and simply reached over to flip over the cover. It's signed by Jiraiya. That was all it took. Kakashi immediately flipped the book closed and smiled. Done! He quickly shook hands with the redhead before scampering off to read what would probably be taking up the majority of his time for the next few days. Naruto just stood there, a little disgruntled at the sudden departure as he turned to go back home. Idiot! I didn't even tell him when or where to meet. Finally, though, he just shrugged, deciding to get some training in tonight. So, Naruto is your boyfriend then? Kurenai gulped, desperately trying to rid her cheeks of the red flush, even as Anko continued to snicker into her hand. The violet hadn't stopped laughing for a good minute, and Kurenai felt incredibly self-conscious, with half the Dango bar staring at them. Anko seemed to have no such reservations, as she finally sighed and with contentment, leaning back and kicking her feet up on the table. Yep. Kurenai nodded pleasantly, wondering if the woman was going to say anything else. However, it seemed the uncle wasn't going to make this easy for her, so What's that like? Uncle tilted her head lazily towards her with a single brow cocked up in bemusement. Huh? She shrugged comically, casually reaching for another skewer of dango before sliding the three dumplings into her mouth at once, seemingly quite happy to just sit there and munch on them. That's nice. Uncle's lips quivered slightly as she fought down her smirk, just nodding with her mouth still full. Uh-huh. Karenai's eyebrow twitched as she began to drum her fingers on the table rhythmically. She could tell Uncle was just messing with her now. Noticing this, Uncle chuckled, swallowing her mouthful before slinging her arms around the older woman's shoulders. Oh, come on, Thorn-chan. You really need to lighten up a bit. I'm just playing with you. After all, who wouldn't be attracted to my kick-ass boyfriend? At that, Kurenai's cheeks threatened to flame up again before she forcefully quelled it by taking a sip of her tea. She really felt like leaving this slightly crazy woman right about now, but the grip she had around her shoulders was surprisingly strong. So how did you two meet? Hoping to get the conversation moving so she didn't feel quite so awkward anymore. Kerr and I hoped to get Uncle talking and maybe stop calling her Thornchan. Oh, funny, you should mention it. It's a pretty romantic story, actually. Surprised at the hint of passion that had entered the eccentric girl's voice, and being a sucker for a bit of romance, Kerr and I actually found herself leaning towards the violet. You see, we first met at the academy a few weeks after the QB attack, so at the time, Naruto had just lost his family. Of course, I was a bit of a half-wit back then, so when I walked into that class and saw him sitting up at the back of the class, brooding like an Uchiha, which was weird because we had two Uchiha in our class and neither were all that broody. What was I saying? Kurna sighed quietly, any intrigue in the story suddenly lost as she remembered just who she was telling it. The academy. Uncle's eyes lit up and she nodded enthusiastically. Right, well, I saw this flaky redhead with hair that just couldn't be naturally sticking right up in the corner, barely paying attention to anything. So I had to rile him up. Kernai blinked but didn't interrupt. So I spent the rest of the day messing about and being the general nuisance that I am. Again, Kernai blinked, at least she admitted it. I'm not really getting much of a reaction though, so I follow him out to lunch only to see him walk up the side of the academy of all things. Another blink. That was a pretty advanced skill for a fresh academy entrant. So again, I follow him up to see him sitting on the edge of the roof, just quietly eating his lunch. Kerr and I was actually a little surprised. This all seemed rather strange for a kid to do for someone they knew nothing about. Naturally, I tried to sneak up on him to give him a shock. Probably not the best idea on a roof. But like I said, I was a bit of a dense then. He spots me though without even looking up from his bento. We sat together, talked for a bit, and then he offered me some of his bento because I hadn't got one. Then, of course, Ako looked ready to continue before a frown crossed her features and she trailed off, suddenly looking like she'd had the enthusiasm ripped out of her. Oh, well, anyway, to make a long story short, 5 months later, and I was living with him. She smiled brightly, but Kurenai was too shocked by the sudden turn to the story that she missed how forced it appeared. However, a moment later, and the raven-haired woman was staring at Uncle expectantly, and Uncle cocked an eyebrow. And what? Kurenai shrugged the woman's off her shoulder so she could turn around and face her. And where's the romantic part? Again, Uncle just looked at the woman strangely. He shared his bento with me. We were six women. What do you want? At that, Kurenai's cheeks flared up again as she turned away. However, Ango just chuckled, lightly punching her in the arm. You're okay, Kurenai. I feel like this is the start of a wonderful friendship. Kurenai groaned internally at that. At least she had stopped calling her that irritating nickname. Oh, Mordango, scoot over, Thorn-chan. It seems she thought too soon. Uh, I'm still not sure this is a good idea, guys, Sakura whispered meekly to the others on her team as they all hopped over the fence into Naruto's backyard. Sakura turned around to look at her with thinly veiled irritation, while Ame just blew air out through her teeth. Come on, Sakura, don't turn back into the baby you were during the academy. It's just a bit of shameless fun. The pinkette's eyebrow twitched at that. Ame may have mellowed out in their later years at the academy, not bothering to pick on her with those friends of hers, but that didn't mean Sakura had completely forgiven her. Yeah, but it's Naruto Sensei's that we're trying to prank. It's never going to work. She tried again to convince them, nervous at the reminiscence of it that they could if they got caught. Come on, Sasuke. He finally agreed to take us on a C rank if we started showing some teamwork. Ame just turned and grinned at the girl as they finally got to the back door of the surprisingly modest home for Akage's son. Exactly. So show a little team spirit and stop complaining so much. Sakura just growled at the girl as Sasuke worked at the lock of the door, thankful it was a simple mechanism and not one of those seals their sensei seemed so fond of. That's not what I meant. Plus, what is he going to say if, at that moment, though the girl whispered was cut off by a gentle click of the lock as Sasuke finally pushed the door open? Seeing Sakura's indecisiveness, Sasuke decided to cut right in before they went any further. Sakura, don't you want just a little payback again, Sensei? Seeing her crush talk to her directly made Sakura look up for a moment and think. In her mind, she saw every time Naruto had sparred with her, leaving her tired and sweaty while he barely got a hair out of place, not to mention the fact that his insufferable, easygoing smile never seemed to leave his face, even as he watched them doing a chore after meaningless chore from the comfort of some tree branch or rooftop, doodling away in that scroll of his. Forget everything I said. Let's prank him hard. Aimee grinned, and even Sasuke smirked a little at that, and quickly the three genin darted into the house, wary for any security measure their sensei might have activated. What they weren't expecting was to meet a half-naked woman only wearing a long baggy shirt holding a bottle of sake and a stick of dango. The three kids and the one woman stared at each other for a long few seconds before Uncle decided to break the awkward tension. Hi. She waved slowly, making the last dumpling on the skewer threaten to slide off. You must be Naruto's skating squad then? Three kids nodded slowly. Sasuke was already making plans to bolt and use his teammates as meat shields. He he had seen angry Kunoichi before, and he did not want to experience that one bit. I'm guessing you're here to prank him or something. Again, the genin nodded, but before a but after a pause this time, no point lying to her considering it was pretty obvious what they were doing. After another uneasy pause, Uncle shrugged before walking on through the kitchen where her voice floated back to them. Cool. Bathrooms upstairs to the left, bedrooms opposite. Touch my shit, I'll kill you, and don't try and go in his study. The three genin blinked in surprise before looking at one another incredulously. Who was that? The other two just shrugged at Sakura's question. I'm Anko, his girlfriend. It seems the other Kunoichi had heard them, though, as her voice drifted through from the kitchen, even if it did sound a bit muffled by food. Eventually, after getting over their slight shock, the three genin shrugged and darted off. Sakura to the bedroom, Sasuke to the bathroom, and Ami stayed downstairs by the stairs to keep watch. That was their original plan anyways. The purpose of keeping watch when they had already been discovered seemed redundant, but Ame just decided to go with it. Tonight was too strange as it was though. For a while she just kind of stood around vaguely hearing noises from the kitchen and upstairs. At one point she heard a small explosion from the upstairs only to see Sasuke walk down a few moments later scorched and covered in soot. Ango had also popped her head around the kitchen door, a skewer hanging from her mouth, only to laugh at the boy. You tried to go into the study, didn't you? Sasuke's response was to huff out a small cloud of smoke and pinch the small flame that erupted at the tip of one of his hairs. Don't worry, kid. Better men than you have tried. That didn't seem to quell Sasuke's annoyance, though, as the boy trotted towards the back of the house. Whatever, I may keep watching until Sakura's done. With that, the boy darted out the back door while Anko disappeared into the kitchen again. A few moments later, and Sakura skipped down the stairs, looking a little smug for herself, and following him out. Just as Ame was ready to leave, though, she froze, hearing the door begin to open. Acting on instinct alone, she suddenly burst into a cloud of smoke. When Naruto got home that night, he had to admit that even for him, he probably overtrained a bit. His eyes were half lidded from how tired he was, and the various aches over his body told him that tomorrow morning he would be feeling this. He was a little surprised to see Uncle there in the front hall, looking vaguely like a deer caught in front of a fire jutsu, but was more distracted by what she was wearing, or in other words, how little she was wearing. It looked as though she had waited up for him, which was uncharacteristically sweet for her. Then again, she could have been raiding the fridge again, but he liked to give his girlfriend the benefit of the doubt more than often than not. You didn't have to wait up for me. Uncle's mouth worked uselessly for a few moments before she shrugged with a sheepish smile. Naruto simply smiled tiredly, leaning forward and captured her lips for a moment, leaving the woman red-faced and breathless. She was more surprised, though, when Naruto suddenly ducked down and pulled her body onto his shoulder as he began to head for the stairs. Come on, I need some sleep. I'll make you some ramen in the morning if you're hungry. He never noticed the wide-eyed look of the panic on his girlfriend's face. Ami was freaking out. Why had her first reaction been to hinge into Anko? What kind of idiotic plan had that been? And now Naruto was carrying her upstairs to do who knows what. Briefly her face turned red as it began to wander before she shook herself out of it. So not the time. She was still reeling from that kiss, though. It had been so warm and tender and so filled with passion. Despite Naruto's obvious exhaustion, again her mind began to float away, and no, bad Amy, not that time. However, just as she was ready to try and get away from Naruto, she suddenly found herself back downstairs, watching in confusion as Naruto continued to carry his girlfriend upstairs. With a start, she realized Uncle must had seemingly substituted with her when she noticed her plight and breathed a sigh of relief. However, just as she turned to bolt out the house, as quietly as she could, she caught Uncle mouthing a single word at her with a cheeky grin, patting Naruto on the back possessively. Mine. So Team 7, yet another successful capture of Tora. Congratulations. I think it might be a new record for your team too. Iruka smiled happily at the obviously tired and grouchy Genin in front of him. Backed by the brightly smiled sensei, all three recovered in tiny claw marks as attacks from the Bakenoki couldn't be called mere scratches and a few dirty marks. Now, what will be your next mission? All three 13-year-olds groaned at that. The two girls turned on their sensei with the best pleading look they could manage. Naruto only laughed on in his head, though. This was what they got for trying to fill his shower head with it gin powder. Actually, Iruka, his genin all looked down, knowing that their sensei was likely going to continue torturing them with endless D-ranks like he had yesterday. I think after my cute little genin have been showing such good teamwork and providing so much lately, I'd like a C rank. Three sets of eyes widened about as far as they could go as the Hokage gained a small amused smile, flicking through the next book of mission folders over. A rank it is then. End of chapter 17.